So we're going to kick off on time here. So thank you very much for joining us. My name is John Silva from the News Literacy Project, from the Professional and Community Learning Team. This is our third webinar in our election news literacy series. We are working in partnership with the League of Women Voters for this. We're very thankful for their support and working with them, and we are appreciative of all the work that they're doing. So tonight, we're going to be talking about a really complicated topic, and it's one that I think pretty much all of us have had to deal with in some way. How do we talk to someone when the things they believe just aren't true, right? How do we deal with this? So yes, Barbara, I see your question in the chat. We will make the slides available to everybody, so you'll be able to refer to them later. Because yeah, there's going to be a lot of things we're going to talk about tonight. Because we're worried about some of these things. We're worried about maintaining relationships and friendships, and some of us may be dreading Thanksgiving dinner or other holiday dinners where there's going to be maybe one person in particular who's going to want to talk about something that we're going to have a hard time talking about. I want to start with just a quick review from last week, and to sort of talk about what misinformation is. Just so we can have a common starting point, and then we're going to get into why people believe it, and then how to have these conversations. So remember, misinformation is a very broad topic, right? If you have a piece of information that you can use one of these words to describe, you have something that could be considered misinformation. And this is what makes things so complicated, is that misinformation, almost anything, depending on someone's point of view, they might call something misinformation. And it's very difficult sometimes, because there are times when things are demonstrably, provably false, right? Or provably true, right? But the problem is, when we talk a lot about people's beliefs, particularly with political beliefs or with things relating to how people might be choosing to vote in the upcoming midterms, or with some of the other issues that are happening, sometimes there is an element of truth in the overall misinformation. Sometimes the biggest pieces of misinformation start from something that is actually factual. And this is why when we look at fact checks and we look at some of the things that, it's not often this very clear binary that it's either factual or it's not, right? There is sometimes a spectrum in the things that we're talking about. And so this is part of what makes it difficult, because this kernel of truth is in some ways the anchor for that person's false belief, right? Because there's one element of this, whatever this belief is, because there's one element that this is true, then that anchors that false belief, and it makes it that much more difficult to dislodge. And so this is something that we have to just keep in our minds, that like sometimes there is that one little piece, but we're going to talk about how we can kind of push through this. And so why do people believe misinformation? How do people find themselves in this position where, so I saw in the chat, Nicole says a sixth grader told her that he threw all his Halloween candy away because it had been poisoned, right? Now, a sixth grader, right, is much more easily manipulated than an adult. But consider this: there are a lot of adults, a lot of parents, last night and today, who have been looking very closely at their child's Halloween candy because they're looking for dangerous things. And there are a lot of jokes about it out there, but there's a lot of fear. And it's actually things like fear and anxiety and these like deeply emotional processes that make us vulnerable to misinformation, because false information gets into our brains through emotional and cognitive manipulation, right? And so if there's a topic that we are particularly fearful of, right? Think like child safety, the safety of our children, right? When you think about it on its surface, in some ways, the idea that we're just gonna, one night a week, it's okay for us to take our kids around and take candy from strangers, right? But there, you can imagine that a parent might feel a lot of anxiety about that. And then people can exploit that. And they can put all sorts of fearful misinformation out there. And then one of the things that happens as people kind of get introduced to these false beliefs, they get introduced to other people who share those beliefs. And so they become part of this community. And in this community, you have people who are bonded by this common false belief, and they are constantly reinforcing that belief with each other. They're excluding anyone and everything that might challenge that belief. And they're just, and so there's this reinforcement, there's this echo chamber of belief. And so once people have kind of gotten into it, they actually can find not only something to hold on to that will make those fears and anxieties go away, but also make them feel much more comfortable dealing with that. And this is where people get into that pathway of emotional reasoning. They're not really thinking about it. They're not engaging in critical thinking. They're engaging in emotional thinking because it feels true. They like the way these beliefs make them feel. They like the fact that these beliefs make anxieties go away or make that fear go away. And they also like the feeling that when other people are telling them that they're right, they like the feeling when people are supporting them in that belief, saying, yes, welcome to our community. We all believe this. Everyone is out to get us. It's an us versus them kind of thing. And so there's a lot of comfort in that. But this is the danger of moving away from rational reasoning, right? Rational reasoning is where we have to confront the things that are making us afraid. We have to confront the anxiety in ways that are not comfortable. And we have to be willing to be wrong. And we have to be open to this idea that maybe what we believed isn't true. But the rational mind can accept that, right? The rational mind can process that information in a way that's like, okay, I understand it, and maybe I don't like it, but I will take comfort in the fact that I understand it, and I can move forward. So the thing is that this is the fundamental difference, and this is something you have to keep in mind when you're considering someone who has these beliefs, is that they're not thinking rationally. They believe they are, right? To them, it feels like it's being rational. But the thing is that they are processing everything from a very emotional standpoint. And that's going to be a very important thing to remember as we get deeper into this. Part of this is reinforced through confirmation bias. So this is one of the cognitive biases that can be very easily exploited by misinformation. And it's simply when we hear or see something that agrees with something that we believe, we're likely to simply accept it without really questioning it. We like it when things agree with us. Again, that sort of emotional connection. And when things feel true, right, then they can become true to us, even without any kind of rational thought. And then the next piece of this is when people kind of go deeper, which is motivated reasoning. I mentioned this last week as well. Motivated reasoning is actually what emotional reasoning looks like. When people are interpreting information in a specific way, they are looking for any information that might support what they already believe. Everything is geared towards reinforcing a belief. It's not about trying to determine if their belief is factual or supported by evidence. It's really about either finding anything or creating something that will support the existing belief. And to the people who are engaged in this, they will tell you that they are thinking critically. They will tell you that they are thinking about this more than anyone else. And in a way they are. They are thinking about this in a way that's more than anyone else. They probably spend way more time thinking about these things than anyone else. But they have to, because they have to go through this intense, emotionally charged reasoning path, because they're always trying to prove themselves right. And this is where there's a huge disconnect. And so part of this is about that emotional manipulation as well, right? We want people to be emotional. We want people to continue to be using emotional reasoning. So a lot of misinformation is going to target emotion centers in some way or another. So I used this example last week as an example of misinformation relating to political things. So the person who shared this likely thought it was real and shared it because they're trying to get people angry about this proposed plan, right? So this is not a real screenshot from the commitment to America. So somebody created it to manipulate us into thinking that it's a real policy when it's not. But some people saw it, believed that it was true, and then shared it as well. So this is about fear and anger, right? This is the idea that somehow the Republicans might enact this plan, and that'll take away benefits from veterans, make them ineligible for certain Social Security benefits, but none of it's true, right? But the thing is that for somebody who cares about issues like this, perhaps someone who is a retiree, someone who is a veteran, maybe a disabled veteran, right? They could easily find themselves being afraid and angry that somebody might be coming after some of their, well-deserved benefits. And so in that fear, in that anger, in that anxiety, they may not take the time to really think about it. And so now they're down a path where now that they have a very negative opinion of the group Commitment to America, they now may be going deeper into beliefs about the Republican Party. And these beliefs are being driven by falsehoods. Likewise, I used this tweet from Senator Patty Murray, right? So she made this big, broad claim that wasn't supported by really any evidence when she tweeted it, right? But the same thing is like she's trying to reinforce people's political beliefs. She's trying to get people to vote for her, but also for people in her party, right? She's trying to get people to vote against Republicans. And so it's that same thing. She's trying to go after people's beliefs about Social Security and things relating to, people who are approaching retirement age, who are already past retirement age. And this is actually one of the areas where we have to be most aware, because older adults are actually more vulnerable to misinformation than most other adults. And there's a couple really important reasons for this. One is that the older we get, the more important our beliefs become to us, right? Our beliefs become much more part of our identity. We base many of our life's decisions about our beliefs. We identify based on our political party, we by social views and social beliefs and social causes and political organizations and things. And so our lives become so closely intertwined and with our identity and our beliefs that it becomes that much easier for misinformation to exploit those beliefs, because we have such a strong attachment to them. And so when we talk about some things like this and we target older adults, right, we have to recognize that they are much more vulnerable for a lot of very important reasons. And that's not to say it's only older adults, right? But anyone who has, just a very strong belief, right? The stronger that belief is, the stronger that emotional attachment is going to be, and the easier it is to exploit those emotions. And when we think about the current political climate, in a lot of ways, there are several prominent politicians who are very divisive figures, right? And it really doesn't matter which political party you are part of, right? There are people who, for example, like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. She is a very prominent political figure in American politics. She is obviously well known on the national stage. And people have very strong opinions about her and about her politics, right? And one of the biggest problems is that as a result of that, there are a lot of people out there who are trying to manufacture claims against us. And there's actually one in particular that comes up almost every few weeks, ever since January 6th. There have been trolls who have been trying to manufacture evidence to suggest that Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene was responsible for the pipe bombs that were planted the night before the January 6th insurrection. No such evidence has ever been found. None of the claims have ever been substantiated. There's zero evidence to link her, but people still try. And because of people's strong feelings about politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's very easy for that confirmation bias to just wash over us and sort of manipulate us into believing something is true when it's not. And this is just one example of many where if there's a politician that we strongly dislike or we strongly disagree with this, if we see a meme or something that criticizes them, we're likely to just take notice and accept it without question and share it. And that's a major problem. But this is the thing, is that we have to recognize that people have these beliefs because of that emotional connection. And that's going to take me into this next section, which is why it's so hard to have these conversations. And this is where I want you to kind of take a moment and think about if there's one person in particular that you can see yourself having a conversation with them where what they believe is based on misinformation. And as we're doing this, I want you to think about that person. And we're going to talk about how you need to kind of put yourself in their shoes. Because one of the most important things that we have to understand is that to these folks, what they believe to them is absolutely true. For them, as strongly as we know that something is not, they feel just as strongly that it is. And what's problematic is that in a lot of these beliefs, in a lot of these groups, there has been this us versus them mindset. This idea that, we are the ones that know the truth. There are people who are out to get us. And in some extreme cases, we see people using language and imagery with very strong religious beliefs, like the battle between good and evil, the forces of Satan. But we also see language and imagery about being at war, that there are people who are trying to destroy the fabric of our society, or people who are coming for our children. It's very dark, and this is what makes some of these conversations very dangerous, because they almost see themselves as warriors in these fights. One factor that makes it really difficult to talk to folks about some of these things is institutional cynicism. So basically, when someone goes down these paths into these beliefs, they just generally refuse to trust any source that doesn't reinforce what they believe. There will be a very, very short list of trusted sources, and anything that might be seen as challenging the belief or debunking the belief, they just can't be trusted. And in particular, a lot of these groups they do not trust the media. They usually use the frame the mainstream media, because they only get their information from fringe sources that don't follow some of those important ethical standards. And then, as I mentioned before, this is part of their identity, right? This is because they're part of a community of believers. This is where that identity gets reinforced, and they it almost in some ways changes who they are. And so, this is where we have to understand. We might feel angry or exasperated or just dumbfounded that this person believes this, but we have to sort of recognize that to them, they can't believe that we don't believe what they do. So with that framing in mind, I'm going to sort of pause here to see what kind of questions we might have. Let's see. So Martha asks, isn't a belief by definition something that doesn't have to be backed up by facts or logical reasoning? What about faith? So faith is a very different topic, right? You know, if you think about faith and if you think about religious beliefs, there's a very important difference there, right? Because if we talk about religious beliefs, you know, we can't critically prove that some of these beliefs are true, and we can't also prove that they're not, right? Faith is something that's very different. But when I'm talking about belief in this context, you know, I'm really talking about how we form our political views, kind of how we decide sort of like the things that, you know, are the decisions that we're going to make in our, you know, in our communities and things. And so, you know, our beliefs, and this could be like our position on political and social issues like abortion access or gun ownership, or, you know, or gun restrictions, or things about election integrity or election safety. You know, who should be able to vote? Should we take away the right to vote of someone who's a convicted felon? There's a number of these things so when I'm talking about belief, I'm really sort of focusing on our viewpoints and our positions. And I think it's a really important distinction from religious belief, because, you know, I think we have to try to stay away from that. But the challenge is that in a lot of these extreme cases, we see religious belief being intertwined into these false beliefs. So, for example, in conspiracy theory world, there is a group of people who believe the Earth is flat, and they use a lot of sort of creationism belief to justify their belief that the Earth is flat, and they use a lot of that. We saw a lot of religious imagery and language during the pandemic with things relating to vaccines and such. There's a lot. And so Sydney, you asked, how do you determine truth from real truth? I try not to use the word truth very often, because it's kind of a squishy word in a lot of ways, because truth kind of depends on the person's point of view in a lot of ways, to paraphrase Obi-Wan Kenobi. But the thing is, if something is a fact, if something is verifiable, I think it's important to think about it in the terms of, can something be verified? Can we find evidence that can support this, or the opposite? Do we find evidence that actually shows that that's not true, right? I think so. That's where the word truth kind of gets difficult. Debbie says flat earthers are so far in their beliefs it would take a monumental shock. You know, the thing is, with somebody who's that deep into it, and we'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end, you know, nothing will change their beliefs. There's absolutely nothing. There's a great video that I saw where there was a group of flat earthers. There's actually a couple of them, but like there was one in particular where they were doing a light test, and they actually, you know, they said, like, with this math, we shine a light through these holes in these walls at certain spaces, and if there's a curve, we won't see it at some point. And then obviously they didn't see it because there is a curve, and so they lifted up the wood, and they basically you know, lifted it up in some way to prove that they were right. They will go through all sorts of mental gymnastics or motivated reasoning to always prove themselves right. Karen says, it seems like you're trying to take the high road and do the work to seek to understand them. Are they doing the same, or do they like the chaos? So yes, we are trying to take the high road. We do need to understand them. Like, we have to understand where they're coming from. Empathy is really, really important in this. I don't think they are necessarily always doing the same, but I think most people probably want to. I think I tend to be very optimistic with a lot of this. If I wasn't optimistic, I don't think I could do this work. But I think a lot of people who are in these beliefs, on some level, they recognize that what they believe isn't factual. What they probably recognize on some level, and they want to find. I think a lot of people want to find a way out. They want to find a way out of that belief in a way that can sort of, to sort of save their reputation, to salvage, their reputation with folks. I think a lot of people probably recognize that they need a way out, but we don't like that feeling of being on the outside. We don't like the feeling of being wrong. So we're going to let's talk a little bit about how we can start this, and when we can have these conversations, how we can have the conversation, and what to do if we think it's not going to work. So let's talk about this, about meaningful conversations. So we want to always remember PEP: patience, empathy, and persistence. I think it's really important to recognize that you're not going to change someone's mind with one conversation. They didn't emotionally reason themselves into false belief overnight, and you're not going to rationally reason them out of it in a short period of time either. It's going to take time to sort of guide people out of it. And we always have to approach this from a position of empathy, because that's how we salvage relationships. That's how we have a meaningful conversation, right? That's how we can have a respectful conversation in a way that is not leading towards mockery or sort of anger. And then the more important this person is to you, the more you have to keep at it. Again, it's not going to happen in one conversation. It's not going to happen overnight. But if this person is really important to you, if you feel like it's important that you change their mind, you have to be persistent, because this is the first question you have to consider, right? Who is this person that has this belief? Like, who are they to me? And how important is it to me personally to try to talk to them about this? Because the first thing I will say is, don't get into fights with strangers on the internet, right? Social media, social networking allows us to sort of share our views with anyone and everyone. And there are a lot of people out there who are sharing just outlandish beliefs, and they're doing it because they want to cause trouble. There are trolls. There are people who are, outside bad actors who are trying to influence things, right? You have to be thinking about this, because this is going to be difficult. This is going to be emotionally difficult for you to have this conversation. And so if this person isn't really important to you, I think it's really important for us, and I think it's very healthy for us to just let it go with certain people. We don't have to argue with everyone who doesn't agree with us. It's not easy sometimes, because there are so many people who are trying to challenge our beliefs. But I think it's a piece of self-care for us to be able to say, you know what, I am not going to engage with you, because I don't think you want to have an authentic conversation. I don't think you want to have a genuine conversation. I think all you want to do is argue, and so I'm not going to do it. And so this is where you have to prepare. So let's say you decide this person is important to you. Think about the nature of your relationship, right? What history do you have together? Did you grow up together? Have you just been friends? Were you roommates? Think about the things that connect you to this person, because that connection is going to be really important to establish that empathy. But it's also going to be important to establish the nature of the conversation. This needs to be a conversation, and it needs to be between two people who at least respect the relationship. You have to think about what is the context that you're going to be talking about this. It might be something that they posted on social media. Do you decide to try to engage with them in the comments of the post, or do you send a private message? If it's going to be in person, is it something you can talk about that with them over coffee, over drinks? Or is it maybe going to be in a group setting? Like, do you think this is a conversation that might happen at the Thanksgiving dinner table? Hopefully it doesn't, because group dynamics can easily derail some of the things that you're going to be trying to do. But and then think about if there is someone mutual that you both know and you both respect, that you can kind of bring into it in some way that will help reinforce what you're trying to share them. And then as you're doing this, really trying to consider like where they're coming from with this belief. Like, what is it that really got them down this rabbit hole and down this path, right? And so, there's a lot of different ways that you might do that. You might have this conversation. The strategies I'm going to share with you, you can use them in pretty much any of these. But I will tell you, your best results are going to be if you can do it one-on-one in some way, either an in-person one-on-one conversation, you're sharing a drink, you're having coffee together, or if you're you're sharing it over a text message, or in DMs. The more you can control the environment, the more successful your conversation is likely to be. When you have other people who have access to this conversation, they may not know these strategies, and they may derail this conversation, however unintentionally. So when possible, prioritize scenarios where you can do this one-on-one. One of the most important things you have to remember when you start this conversation is you cannot bring any negative energy to that conversation, right? You cannot be confrontational. You can't make fun of them. You can't hold them in contempt, right? You have to have that patience and that empathy and be respectful of their belief. And I think it's also important for us to remember the difference between discourse and debate. I think one of the biggest problems we have out there today with all of these issues is that everyone is approaching this as a debate, that there has to be a winner and a loser. And my side has to win by defeating your side. And we've lost the art of discourse. We've lost the art of sharing our ideas, considering other people's ideas, and sort of coming to a common understanding. Remember, right, the rational mind can entertain a notion without accepting it, right? We can listen to somebody's views, we can consider their views, and then we can decide, you know what, I don't agree with that. And then we can let it go because it didn't fit, right? It didn't support. But we have to be willing to entertain it. We have to be open to what their views are. And somebody said, take the high road. Yeah, we do have to try to take the high road, because this has to be done in a pretty specific way. And we have to always remain reasonable and patient in this. So here are just a couple of big examples, right? There are, like, I think one of the most powerful two-word combinations you can use is "that's interesting," right? When somebody shares a belief with you, right? And instead of dismissing it, you can sort of say, "that's interesting." And that it does a couple of really important things with just these two words. One is it shows them that you're actually listening to them, and it shows them that you are open to hearing what they have to say. Now, for some people, that's a really important opening, because they want to share what they believe. They want to hopefully see if they can find another person who shares their beliefs. But the thing is that, you will consider it and you'll listen to it, but then you want to ask questions. You want to probe it more. You want to try to learn more about where they're coming from, so then you can share things, right? Ask them if you can share information with them, right? You'll notice that on the right, these are questions, right? These aren't statements. These are questions. Can I share this with you? Can we look at this together? I'm a little skeptical. I want to learn more about this, because that doesn't jive with what I understand, right? And so civility is really important here. And questioning is a very powerful tool, especially those of you who are educators. If you consider a Socratic questioning, right? Asking questions in a way that gets them to explain more, and hopefully, you can use questioning to guide them to, a new, more factual conclusion. If you know you're going to be getting into this conversation, like if you kind of have advance warning, you can do some verification. You can get some evidence ready to go. I mentioned this last week, the rule of three. Having three sources is far more difficult to debunk than one. So, do your homework. You can use the Google like a pro tips. So if you're gonna see your uncle and he's gonna want to talk to you about something crazy, you can have some things ready in the back of your mind that you can share and you can use to drive the conversation. So I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna use an example from the pandemic to illustrate some of this. So let's say somebody posted, someone you know posted this on Facebook, right? So this is from Emerald Robinson. She posted this, that there's this bioluminescent marker called luciferase, and this luciferase is designed to allow whoever to track us, right? It's supposed to, basically, it makes it possible to track people who have gotten the vaccine. But then she also makes a connection to the New Testament and Lucifer and Armageddon, the end of days. So someone posts this on Facebook. You could respond to this, or you could also set up to have a conversation with them a bit later. And so we'll talk about how can we talk about this with the person who shared this in a way that maybe will get them to realize that what they're sharing isn't true. So why did they share it? Why does this person share something like this? Is it because of their fear of the vaccine? Do they have strong vaccine hesitancy? Are they trying to get people to not take the vaccine? Are they trying to push a religious viewpoint in some way? Where does that come from? What can we identify anything that might be an underlying cause of this belief and this, trying to cling to this idea that vaccines aren't safe? And then, think about what can we talk about what can we bring to this? And again, we're trying to avoid those negative feelings. We don't want them to be angry. We don't want them to be embarrassed. So a couple big key points. I just want to reinforce this. I think I mentioned a couple times. If you have a source, ask them to look at it. Don't just post it and say, here's why you're wrong, right? You can sort of say, like, I saw something different. Do you want to see it, right? So I saw a source that actually talks about this. Do you want to read it? Where did you get your information? And you have to be willing to look at it. You actually have to look at it. It may feel weird to say that, but you have to be open to this. And then as you're asking these questions, you really have to listen, right? They have to know that you are listening, because if they feel you're not paying attention, you're going to lose them, right? So you have to do the work to engage in that active listening, and make it conversational, right? Use I statements, talk about it from your perspective, share stories, make it conversational, make it more about personal connections and things. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we might use some sources and how we could use this to push back against this false claim, right? So you can simply say, hey, I saw an article about this, that apparently she got suspended by her work. Her work suspended her because of that tweet. Did you see it? It's from the Daily News. I can send it to you if you like, right? So you have this article that talks about this, this specifically this tweet. And what it does is this is an outside source. Now, yes, somebody might not trust a particular source, right? This is why you got to have multiple sources. But this is an opening point, because you're not going to tell them that they're wrong. You're saying, I saw something about this that I think is relevant, right? So you're not directly saying what she posted was false, but what you're saying is, like, she actually faced some consequences for that tweet. And hopefully if they read about it, they will see that not only what was the content problematic, but it was part of a pattern. You can go a bit deeper into this and express your skepticism, right? And because part of this, like, this wasn't just a one-off that she did. That was part of a pattern of things, and you can sort of say, like, I saw this on the local television, right? This is my Fox 28 Columbus. I saw this, that she got banned by Twitter permanently because of this. Like, there was just this pattern of just so much that she was putting out there that was just fake. And you just, and then bring in this idea that she didn't have any credibility, that she wasn't trustworthy, right? It's not me saying she's not trustworthy, right? Well, so many other people are saying it. And using local sources can be very effective. People generally trust local sources of news more than national, which is good in a lot of ways, except for the fact that a lot of local sources of news are disappearing. But this is another thing, it goes directly to that tweet, right? So you can say, hey, I was shocked when I saw that. I was shocked by it, right? But we were shocked for different reasons. I'm not going to say that part, right? But then I saw it on the news last night, and apparently it's not true at all. You should watch this. I think it's relevant, and share the recording with them. But again, like, you're not calling it out directly, right? You're trying to make that connection. You're trying to talk about it in a way that's not directly saying what they posted was wrong, but it's encouraging them to look at new information. And by looking at new information, hopefully it gives them an opportunity to look at it from a more rational perspective. And then I learned something interesting about this, right? I learned that, this random fact, right? Lucifer is Latin for light bearer. And it's not about the vaccine. I'm not talking about the vaccine myself, but it's like, hey, look at this. But so these were about the that vaccine as well. But thinking about storytelling, about personal connection, I wanted to add this one in, because thinking about other people, other connections, right? You want that empathy to be there. You want them to be thinking about what this false information might do to other people. So these are some of the big strokes here with this. But here's the thing: there are going to be people, and there are going to be beliefs that just aren't worth the time and effort. And so sometimes it's just important to not engage at all, right? If somebody believes some of these things that are just outright crazy, just say, wow, that's crazy, and then change the subject. Because it's not going to be worth your time, because if somebody is that deep into it, no amount of empathy, no amount of patience, no amount of persistence is going to get them out of it. And so the last thing that I will mention, and then I think we have a number of questions, which I'm seeing the number go up here. When you're having this conversation, if you feel like the conversation is turning negative, right? If you feel like the person you're talking to is getting agitated or angry, just try to stop the conversation and see if you can bring it up again later. It's like, hey, you know what? I didn't mean to upset you. Maybe we can talk about this another time. Okay. So Kimberly Adams, do you have data to determine if this phenomenon is more towards the left or the right politically? There are a number of studies out there about sort of the volume of misinformation from particular political viewpoints, but the thing is that these beliefs aren't always political. Some of these can be about social issues or cultural issues. Some of them can be about conspiracy theories. And so it's really not so much about left or right as much as it is like, how important is this particular belief to this person, right? If there is a particular we'll just say a political issue, right? If there's a particular political issue that they have very strong feelings about, they are more likely to be easily manipulated by false information. And so it's not necessarily about left or right or center, but really about the depth and the strength of the belief. So Stephen asked what to do if dismissed by the person you want to discuss it with, besides walk away. Obviously, if they don't want to talk to you, don't force the issue, but maybe just sort of, ask if you can sort of say, hey, I get it. You don't want to talk about it. Maybe we could talk about it, some other time. Leave it open to them that you are interested in talking to them about it, right? Leave it open to this idea that you want to listen, that you want to talk to them, and respect that they don't necessarily want to talk about it right now, but just try to leave it open. How do you avoid being cynical? Rhett Bowling asks, how do you avoid being cynical? Well, I will say personally, I avoid being cynical because I see evidence of people changing their views. And I do know that sometimes these things can work. I have had some friends and friends of friends that I have talked to about this. And, there's actually one person that was a friend of a friend that was basically had cut off her mother entirely because of political views. And um, her in was the relationship between her mother and the grandchildren, and talking about how much her beliefs had damaged the relationship. And she wanted to talk to her about it from the perspective of like, look, you need to spend time with your grandchildren need to spend time with you, but we can't do that unless we can figure some of this out. They haven't resolved all of it, but they've gotten to a point where they can have these conversations in a way that is more civil, right? They can disagree in a way that isn't sort of emotionally harmful or angry. And so I avoid cynicism, and I think all of us can avoid cynicism because not everyone has these beliefs. And I think for most people, if we can just get them to a rational space, they can come around. How can one address a falsehood when it's so difficult to prove a negative that something didn't actually happen? That is a major challenge because this is more relevant to conspiracy theories, but it also relates to a lot of other sort of deep political and social beliefs. Because for a lot of people, the lack of evidence is evidence itself, right? But they also find ways to dismiss evidence. If you think about it, if we think about it in terms of flat Earth, right? Like they're constantly finding ways to dismiss the evidence that we do live on a round Earth or spheroid Earth. But the thing is like we're not necessarily going to have to address that falsehood because we don't think that they're open to addressing it. And I think that's the thing is if they're so deep that it becomes as difficult to have a conversation, then it's not worth the time. So you can talk about things in ways where you can evaluate evidence, you can evaluate facts, but that person has to be open to listening to them. Much of what I'm saying is focused on a personal conversation between two people. Do I have any recommendations for a classroom setting? Yeah, we do actually. There's actually something on our website that I wrote a while back about having it's called controversial conversations about current events. I think in a classroom setting, one of the most important things that you have to do from the very beginning is manage goals, set guidelines, and make sure everybody understands like how you're going to have a conversation. I think there's a lot of great guidelines for like Socratic seminar and guided discussions and things like that. But the thing is, you have to have a conversation first about how to have a conversation. And it's a matter of, in some ways, regulating who gets to speak and when, and who gets to respond. So I think it's really important to find those procedures, right? Those steps, so that one person has an opportunity to speak, and while that person is speaking, everyone else should be engaging in active listening. And then if somebody wants to respond, then they have space to respond, right? And then everyone's engaging in active listening. I think a classroom setting, you're much more likely to be able to do that if you sort of set that up set those expectations from the very beginning. But also, prioritize like what will we accept in these conversations about like what's going to drive these conversations. This is why I think having, if we're talking about a group setting, and like we'll just use the Thanksgiving dinner table, for example, right? We have zero control over the rest of the people at the table. And so unless it's a group setting in some sort of controlled environment where everyone has an interest in having the conversation, it's best to try to do it one-on-one. So Vicky asks, what should you do if you were unprepared with sources during a conversation? Pass on continuing discussion. I wouldn't pass. I would sort of say, like, I'm interested in exploring this more. And maybe in that moment you could take your phone out. Like, I actually do this with my son all the time. He's almost 13, but like, I do this all the time. Like, I'll pull my phone and, like, let's look that up, and I think it'd be fair in that moment to be like, wow, that's really interesting. Do you mind if I take a minute to look that up? So you can try to do that, or you can say, like, you can listen to them and then find a way to, just find a way to end the conversation, but try to bring it up again later. Like, this is a really interesting topic. I'd like to talk about this more, but if you wouldn't mind, like, I'd like to learn more about it before we talk together. Okay, I'm going to keep answering questions, but I'm going to pause here with questions. We would absolutely love your feedback on this session in particular. We want to make sure that we're addressing things, and we want to know how effective this was. I know this is a topic a lot of us are really interested in. I know it's a really difficult one. I am very hopeful that I've given you some very good advice, actionable advice, and hopefully you'll feel a little bit confident to do this. So if you have a few minutes, we would love your feedback. So Kate says, election denial persists after it has been studied. There is persistent disinformation concerning issues like this. How do I deal with persistent misthinking like this? So the thing is that there is a spectrum of this, much like vaccine hesitancy, right? Not everyone who is vaccine hesitant is anti-vaccine. And so not everyone who has hesitations or concerns about election integrity believe that the election was stolen or the election was rigged. And so this is where kind of recognizing where on the spectrum this person is. If you have somebody who is so deep in this that they basically said, they refuse to entertain any information that shows that the election was safe and secure, and the number of voter fraud cases was shockingly low. If they refuse to entertain anything like that, then there's just no purpose in trying to have the conversation, because it's not going to work. But I think there's a lot of people who are worried, who have concerns, and part of that is because of how vocal the election deniers are about how often the big lie, it's the big lie, how often these lies and falsehoods are being repeated and reinforced. And I think there's a lot of people who are in that gray zone where they're just like, well, I'm not entirely sure. That's when you can have the conversation, and part of the question could be like, well, what would make that go away? Like, what would make you feel like your vote will be counted in a way that is safe and secure? What will make you comfortable in understanding that actually it's not as big of a problem as people would have you believe? And so I think this is where the challenge is also. This is where we also have to understand that this is a very vocal minority in the end. I think we have this sort of outsized perception that there are more people than there actually are. And there was a quote that I saw a while back. I've never been able to figure out where it was from, but somebody once said 100,000 people angry about something on social media is the equivalent of 100 people marching outside of City Hall. And so I think you have these like very vocal believers, but they're actually not as numerous as they appear to be. And so that's another reason why I'm optimistic, and I tend to be a little less cynical, is because I do know that, like, while they do put a lot of misinformation out there, there's actually not that many of it. And I think the overwhelming majority of us feel very comfortable and confident in voting in the next week or so. Let's see. I'm trying to see if so Mary says, I might try to see if that person was willing to look at one of my sources if I promise to look at theirs. and then agree to table the chat till later. I think that's a great strategy. I think that's a really good way of approaching this, right? You can sort of say, like, you show me yours, I'll show you mine. We'll take a look at it, and then let's talk. Let's get a cup of coffee and talk about it, right? But it's that openness, right? We're willing to entertain their notions, and hopefully we feel confident that they will entertain ours. Let's see. So Amy says, I'm always concerned when I hear a statement that I believe exposes a false equivalency. Does one side create more misinformation than the other, or can we say both do equally? I don't know that we can necessarily say both do equally, but I think it depends largely on the topic. I think that there are some topics that a great deal of misinformation comes from one side over the other, but neither side is innocent in this. And if we talk about sort of, political perspectives, misinformation comes from across the political spectrum and across social issues. But false equivalency brings up, the issue of logical fallacies. And that's where, really listening to what a person is saying, and, being able to recognize if something is based on a logical fallacy, like false equivalency, right? But that's where that active listening really becomes important. I'm mainly looking at the Q&A box here. I'm going to really quickly see if there's anything. Okay, so all right, so we're posting links in the chat. Thank you, Ali and Demario. Asking question, is that the best way to have dialogue? So Scott Watson asked that. It's not necessarily the way to have the entire conversation, but I think asking questions is a really important way to establish the basis of the conversation. I think asking questions and listening is an important way to get it started, because you have to ask some questions to understand where they're coming from. You have to ask questions to understand the basis of their beliefs, to understand where they get their information from. But I think that, by asking questions, you're also demonstrating that you're open to listening. So it's not the only way, but it's a really important way to start. James Kelly, how about bringing up manipulation of propaganda, etc., and how it works? I would not bring that up until maybe the second or third conversation, right? Because I think it's important to be able to say, look, some of this information is coming from people who are actively trying to manipulate us. There are people who are trying to manipulate our elections. They're trying to manipulate our communities. There are people who are using propaganda as a weapon to drive these wedges. You could bring that up, but I wouldn't bring that up in the first conversation, because we don't want them to feel like we're saying they were manipulated right away. But I think it's important later on to sort of say, hey, like, yeah, that source was really manipulative. I think you could do that. Let's see. So Kathleen Kirk, this is kind of a long one. I gave a presentation on mis and disinformation that parallels other webinars. It was to a networking group, and one attendee is running for office, and she's the victim of defamation. An opponent mailed an anonymous letter with falsehoods about her. She can call a press conference, get someone known and respected to support her publicly after this. What other suggestions do you have for candidates or elected officials? This isn't anything new, toxicity in our politics. We've always had ugly elections in this country, go all the way back to our earliest elections. I think social media and the internet have made it easier to spread, all sorts of false and disparaging and just ugly information. And I don't know if I have the best advice for a person who's running for office, other than, debunking it once, putting it out there, and hopefully getting supporters to share it. But, I think if you're a candidate reaching out to people from, on the other side of the aisle, and you're trying to get them to vote for you, you have to confront some of those things. But I think, one of the most important things for a political candidate is I think most of us really are looking for a reason to vote for you and not necessarily why we shouldn't vote for the other person. So, I because of my sort of optimism and such, I try to encourage people to always take the high road. Thank you for joining us for this. I'm hoping that this was useful and effective, and I gave you some things to consider, and hopefully you feel a little bit empowered and a little bit more confident to have some of these conversations. So thank you very much. If you have voted already, please, thank you for your vote. If you have not, make sure you do vote. Elections are always important, and this one, I think in many ways, even more so. So thank you for joining us. I'm glad you enjoyed this time. And I hope you all have a lovely evening.